Welcome to Shadowed Tales, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and the unknown waits just beyond the shadows. Here, we delve into the mysteries that defy explanation, the whispers of forgotten legends, the chilling truths hidden in plain sight, and the horrors that lie beneath the veil of the everyday. Are you brave enough to uncover what lurks in the darkness? Do you dare question the stories the world wants you to forget? Open your mind, steel your nerves, because here, every tale holds a secret, and every shadow has a story. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Allan Memorial Institute in Montreal stood as a beacon of hope for those suffering from mental illness. Patients arrived with faith in Dr. Ewen Cameron, a globally renowned psychiatrist who had pioneered treatments for anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia. Yet, behind the doors of this esteemed institution, unimaginable horrors unfolded. These experiments, funded covertly by the CIA under its top-secret MKUltra program, aim to unlock the potential for mind control. Prepare yourself to dive into the unbelievably true story of an actual mad scientist that terrorized ordinary men and women who were only looking for one thing: help. Dr. Ewen Cameron was a Scottish-born psychiatrist, born December 24, 1901, in Bridge of Allan, Scotland. Cameron studied medicine at the University of Glasgow and later specialized in psychiatry. He moved to the United States in the 1930s and quickly rose to prominence in the field of psychiatric research. The horrors began in 1943. Cameron became the director of the Allan Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada, part of McGill University. This facility became the site of his most infamous experiments. Cameron was considered a pioneer in developing treatments for psychiatric disorders, particularly schizophrenia. He introduced new techniques for therapy, including electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, and the use of drugs like LSD. He was also one of the first psychiatrists to explore the idea of depatterning, erasing a patient's memories and behaviors to rebuild their personality. Although he was respected in his field at the time, his methods were controversial even among his peers due to their extreme nature. His work remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of psychiatry. Cameron's program at Allan Memorial expanded rapidly. Patients suffering from depression, anxiety, or mild psychological issues, many of whom had checked themselves in voluntarily, became unwitting participants in his experiments. The cornerstone of Cameron's work was depatterning. This involved breaking down a patient's existing thought processes to a blank slate through a combination of induced comas, electroconvulsive therapy administered at levels far beyond the standard, and hallucinogenic drugs like LSD. "I'm going to fix you," Cameron would tell his patients. They believed him, trusting his authority. What followed was often months of grueling, inhumane treatment. Some patients were subjected to repeated recordings of phrases or commands, played on loop for 16 to 20 hours a day. Others were given experimental cocktails of drugs that left them disoriented, terrified, or catatonic. In his private notes, Cameron referred to the process as psychic driving. The CIA, however, had a simpler term: brainwashing. Hundreds of patients at the Allan Memorial Institute, many of them women suffering from postpartum depression, anxiety, or minor mental health issues, fell victim to these inhumane experiments. Their stories reveal the devastating consequences of Cameron's methods. Velma Orlikow came to the Institute seeking relief from postpartum depression. Instead, she was subjected to repeated psychic driving sessions and left with permanent memory gaps and emotional trauma. Esther Schreier, another patient, endured weeks of drug-induced comas and electroshock therapy, emerging with no recollection of her time at the Institute and severe cognitive impairments. Jean Steele, a trusting patient, left the Institute unable to remember her family or perform basic tasks, her mind shattered by depatterning. These women, and many like them, were not informed of the experimental nature of their treatment. They were stripped of their humanity, reduced to test subjects in a grotesque pursuit of mind control. The goal of depatterning was to obliterate a person's memories, behaviors, and identity, effectively reducing their mind to a blank slate. To achieve this, Cameron employed massive electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Patients were subjected to shock treatments at 30-40 times the normal intensity. The procedure left many of them in vegetative states, unable to remember their own names or recognize loved ones. Drug-induced comas. Patients were kept unconscious for weeks at a time using heavy sedatives such as thorazine and barbiturates, stripped of all agency and awareness. Hallucinogens. Cameron administered LSD and other experimental drugs without patients' consent, triggering terrifying hallucinations and psychosis. In his private notes, Cameron referred to the process as psychic driving. The CIA, however, had a simpler term: brainwashing. Once a patient's mind had been wiped, Cameron sought to reprogram them using this psychic driving method. Patients were forced to listen to repeated audio messages for up to 20 hours a day, often while drugged or restrained. Messages ranged from affirmations to commands, depending on Cameron's goal for the patient. This bombardment of messages often caused severe psychological distress and confusion, rather than the intended reprogramming. For the patients, the treatments were a nightmare. A young mother, Anne, had checked into the institute, seeking help for postpartum depression. Under Cameron's care, she endured weeks of forced comas and relentless audio recordings, her mind dulled into submission. When she was discharged months later, she could barely remember her children's names, let alone care for them. Over time, whispers about the Institute's extreme methods began to circulate among Montreal's psychiatric community. Cameron dismissed the criticisms as the jealous grumblings of less visionary peers. "Science demands boldness," he wrote in one of his journals. "The risk is justified by the reward." By the early 1960s, the CIA began to try and distance itself from MKUltra, concerned about backlash and the potential exposure. Funding for Cameron's work dried up, and he shifted focus, eventually leaving Cameron to pursue other opportunities. However, the damage had been done, and his experimentation would become his haunting legacy. Years later, investigative journalists uncovered the link between Cameron's research and the CIA. Lawsuits followed, brought by survivors and their families, demanding accountability for the suffering inflicted at the Institute. Though Cameron himself had died in 1967, the revelations cast a long shadow over his career. Once celebrated as a pioneer in psychiatry, he was now remembered as a man whose ambition and moral compromises had led him to betray the trust of those he had sworn to heal. Cognitive damage. Many patients left the Institute unable to read, write, or function independently. Their memories, often the cornerstone of their identities, were irreparably erased. Emotional trauma. Survivors experienced chronic depression, anxiety, and flashbacks. Many struggled with feelings of betrayal and mistrust toward medical professionals. Family impact. Families were torn apart as loved ones returned home as shadows of their former selves, unable to reconnect with spouses or children. Cameron's work was covertly funded by the CIA through a front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. The agency's goal was to explore mind control techniques that could be weaponized during the Cold War. The CIA funneled $60,000 a year to Dr. Cameron for his research, a sum of over $500,000 in today's money. The Canadian government also indirectly supported Cameron's work, providing grants and facilities for his experiments. Neither institution questioned the ethics of his methods. Blinded by his prestige and the allure of groundbreaking psychiatric advancements, everyone involved chose to just look the other way. Dr. Cameron's experiments at the Allan Memorial Institute represent one of the darkest episodes in psychiatric history. What began as a promise of help and healing turned into a nightmare of exploitation and suffering and devastation. For the survivors and their families, the trauma will forever endure as a chilling reminder of the price of unchecked power and unethical experimentation at the hands of a person's own government. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with us. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a step deeper into the mysteries. Have your own theories or questions? Share them in the comments. Your insights might unlock the next secret we uncover. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit and your eyes on the shadows, for they hold the keys to hidden truths.